and turned. In front of the warriors, at the front of the group, knelt 6 men. It was clear they had been captured, and patently clear, from the knives at their throat, that their time was soon. She looked back to Ragnall, who was still holding out a hand of welcome. Where was Bryder? Osrith's mind was diverted for a moment. She had been opposite Ragnall. Come, Osrith, he told her, a mocking tone in his voice as he examined Osrith for her reaction. Stand by me. Come to see what you have brought your warriors to. And to her horror, Osrith saw that these were no ordinary prisoners, but her mercenaries, kneeling, silently, close to the end of their lives. Eglfrith and Oshir, brothers and comrades in arms, knelt closest to her, and to the left of Oshir, Falkbald, focusing on a spot on the floor. Elfkin was beside Falkbald, and at the end of the row was her dearest friend. Elfrith was staring straight ahead, refusing to meet Osrith's eye. The soldier in Osrith began to think, and plan. Did Elfrith have a plan? Did Elfkin? He had been their leader before Osrith had arrived. Perhaps he had briefed his men on what to do. Something, Osrith reasoned, with growing alarm. Anything. Elfrith. Wait, there were 6 swords, 6 warriors brought to the front. It slowly dawned on Osrith that, in the absence of the Mormers and Owain, there could only be one person to fill the space under the 6th sword. Osrith felt her hand move to Buay. Fighting her way out, though her odds were impossible, was the only thing she could do. Why it was her warriors were under blade was irrelevant now. What they did now was no swords, Osrith thought. Ragnall, or Bryder, really means their death. But wait, she had a sword. Was the implication that she would fight for their freedom? However, before Osrith could pursue that idea, a wailing sound came from the back of the hall, a wailing, mewing sound, like kittens searching for their mother. All heads turned to the thrones, and just beyond it Osrith saw Bryder then, holding the hands of 2 children. It was the children who were crying out their pitiful moans, and Bryder stooped to their level, pushing one child close to her, so she could speak in Bryder's ear, and then the other. She then looked at Osrith, and the look was not pleasant. My seers, dear ones, have seen beyond this world, and they tell me. Bryder paused, and looked around the room. And it occurred to Osrith that this could not be real, could not be true. How could 2 children tell Bryder anything? But the Norse was straining to listen, and Osrith looked again at the children, both girls, it seemed to Osrith, around 5 years old. And both girls, when Osrith examined their faces, were blind. No, not blind, Osrith told herself sharply, blinded. Their eyes put out, for whatever reason. For the reason of, Osrith made her eyes move slowly back to Bryder, who was holding the children's hand, the reason of receiving words from the gods. Osrith set her jaw firm. If Bryder could castrate a man, a priest, for no other reason than being a priest and being Utad's son, would she have drawn the line at blinding 2 children? Dread and horror, like icy water, filled her stomach as she recalled Bryder's words. She had twin daughters. Could these 2 pitiful children, so cruelly treated, be her own? They say, Ragnall, Bryder told the Norseman, that victory will come with Osrith of Bibbenberg. Yes, of course that is who you are, Bryder added. And to prove it, she must fight and prepare to die. Then I will fight, Osrith told Bryder, a plan instantly forming in her mind. I will fight for my men. She thrust an arm towards the mercenaries, where the Albalords were. Osrith was at a loss. I will fight, she continued, thumping her chest, and then raising her fist, that my loyal men of Mercia will go free. And I have victory at hand. I have victory. It had been one night around a fire, many years ago, when Osrith explained the name behind her sword. Won in a fighting contest at Tara, when the High King was to be crowned, and Malmuir, Constantine's aunt, got married. Buay, victory, had never been from her, and had been her replacement for the one stolen by Nine Fingers. Her men knew most of the story, and had especially enjoyed rolling their eyes at the weak joke. They weren't rolling their eyes now, Osrith knew. Each and every one of them knew that she was talking of Bué. But what she was not expecting was who her opponent would be. It was Uhtred. Osrith had never seen her brother so subdued, so broken before. Blood trickled from the crown of his head, and his arm seemed to be misshapen. At his ankles, slave chains, and he shuffled about next to Ragnar. "Impossible!" screamed her brain, as she looked over to her brother. How had he been chained? More to the point, how could he have been captured? Had Aethelstan, or Ethelfled, even, just given him up? That was more unlikely than Uhtred being captured. Uhtred's blade was called Serpent Breath, and he was holding her tightly in his hand, never taking his eyes, unblinking as they were, from Osrith. "Oh yes, we neglected to tell you that the fight to death, or glory," Ragnar told her, glancing to Osrith's warriors, "was with the man you hate most in the world." Osrith looked to her brother again, and then across to Ragnar. "Unchain him," Osrith demanded. "Why has he been chained?" She demanded to know. But Ragnar ignored her, and looked across to Bryder, before back to Osrith. He seemed very pleased with himself, like a cat, Osrith thought, who had captured a particularly enormous rat. "My now, I wonder who would the advantage," he mused, "for effect." "I would," Osrith boasted. "I have been waiting a long time for this, brother," and, at the word, turned her head back to Uhtred's chained ankles. He was still able to move them, and he stood, warrior ready before her. How had Uhtred let himself be captured? But of course he hadn't, Osrith told herself. There was some ruse here. Did the Norse know? Did Ragnar know? Bryder? She seemed too wrapped up in the ritual of being Danish, with the trappings, its process, to really be noticing what was happening in the hall before her. There must be something, Osrith reasoned. But Uhtred was giving her nothing. So Osrith did not hesitate. Whatever this was, it had to seem real, so she began by lunging forward towards Uhtred, who was not prepared for the speed she was going for. Instead of attacking him, however, she thrust Bué into a rope that was holding up the banners of Ragnar's line. A Norse standard fell down over her brother, who fought himself out of it, elbows and wrists, to the laughter and encouragement of all who were watching. When it lay on the ground, Uhtred roared at her, a guttural lake of a sound, and shuffled forward, the chain between his ankles long enough to stride with, which he did effectively, plunging serpent breath towards her, which she thrust away from her, holding the handle of her sword with two hands. Osrith. She heard her name on the periphery of her ear, but it was too dim, too dull to pay attention to. Uhtred came back with a blow of his own which struck the hilt of Bué, bending one of the hand protection pieces. Osrith moved her hand in time, hitting Uhtred at the back of his leg with the pommel. It wasn't enough to make him fall, but he twisted awkwardly, and the stab of his sword which was aiming for her torso. Around them, a groan went up, Norsemen appreciating a fight, and a missed blow was a disappointment. Osrith turned and, while Uhtred struggled to his feet, Osrith willed him to let go a hint, a shard of light to land into her brain and make it all make sense. "What is it, brother?" she asked the world. "What is going on?" She sneaked a glance at the crowd. Her Mercen warriors were still kneeling, faces away. But where were Engus and Felim? Owain? Her eyes darted around, looking for anyone, any clue that she could use. And Uhtred's men. Sihrik, Osferth. Finan. What was going on? So she kept her advantage, despite suddenly wearying. Lack of food was now making her muscles tired. But she shook her head and made herself focus. "What do you need, Uhtred?" "What?" Uhtred stood before her again, a ferocious look on her face, and this time the advantage was his, as he drove her back towards the rear of the hall, giving her no time to catch her feet nor reply in kind. The blade got close to Osrith's face with the next blow, but she slipped under Uhtred's arm, shoving his elbow, which clearly pained him, and he jolted forward. Clearly? No, this was acting. He had smeared blood on himself to make himself look injured. The chains were not locked around his ankles, although from a distance they appeared to be, behind Uhtred, and Osrith turned the point of Bué to Uhtred's back, tapping it lightly, and then scoring down his leather jerkin, though it looked more brutal than it was. He should get the hint now, that she knew there was a ruse. But the pain in her leg told Osrith different. Utad had kicked back forcefully with the chain, which had whipped into her shin. That was painful, and Osrith staggered back, crying out with pain and anger. "Why won't you help me guess the plan?" Osrith raged in her mind. "Let me help you." "Finish him," came a cry from Ragnall's direction, and a quick glance told Osrith that Bryder, with a contented grin on her face, was enjoying every moment of the fight. She had her daughters, if that's who the poor little mites were, beside her. And beside them, 2 more children were now standing. Osrith spat out the dust in her mouth and brushed off the bits of splintered wood that had flown up from the damaged hall floor. She narrowed her eyes to Utad. "Ready to give up, brother?" she shouted, for now was a good time for the trash talk. "You are already half beaten, Daneslayer." And she made sure to emphasize Utad's epithet, to wind up the Norse even more. "Never," Utad called back, his voice sounding hoarse though not letting that get in the way of his hostility. And he bore down on Osrith again, dropping serpent breath into an axe blow. But Osrith intercepted it with a thrust of her own, which caught Utad in the wrist. He dropped Bué, and lurched forward from the momentum of the intended blow. "You're a very good warrior, brother. Now surrender." And her affected manners caused a ripple of laughter amongst the Norse. "Tell me," Osrith begged. "Show me." "I'm unable to oblige you, Osrith," Utad replied, in a similarly deliberate tone. "Can't you see that you won't win this? Surrender and you won't die." "The plan, damn it." "Who said anything about dying?" And Utad upped the effort in his engagement in the fight, sending blow after blow, wounding Osrith in her neck and shoulder and side. "Osrith!" Someone was calling her name. But she was staggering back now, recalibrating her options and adapting to what she had left. The pain was immense, sharper and deeper than many she had sustained before. Rallying, Osrith tried to maneuver herself, but could not, because she had backed herself up towards the guards on the western doors, and so she was forced to stay in one place as Utad drove from side to side, attacking her. And then it came. His voice was low, and Osrith thought that she had missed it. But it came, and his words made her heart lift, her spirit rise. "Parry left," he told her, and here was it, the part Osrith needed to play. Somewhere there had been a conspiracy, and it would now be over. Osrith parried left, and realized what a mistake that had been. Utad had been ready with the backhanded blow, which forced Bué back to the right and made Osrith lose her balance. She fell, hitting her head on the hall floor. A gasp and an "oh" filled the air as she opened her eyes. Bué was still in her hand. But it wasn't enough, as Utad trod heavily on her already damaged arm. 2 hands were on serpent breath now, and it was coming on towards her. The killing blow. It was no comspray after all. Her brother was about to cleave his blade into her body. Osrith closed her eyes. But the blow did not come. What did come was a thump, a body falling next to her. The pressure came off Osrith's arm, and she withdrew it, opening her eyes. Beside her, Elfrith lay dead, serpent breath embedded so far into his chest that her point was grazing the back of his jerkin. Her loyal friend had put himself in front of her brother's killing stroke, and laid down his life for her.